White woman kicks black girl out of first class, and 10 minutes later, she's removed from the flight. But what that woman said to that 15-year-old debate champion before security arrived will make you question everything you thought you knew about progress in America. Diane Hartwell's voice cut through the first-class cabin of United Airlines Flight 1847 with the kind of certainty that comes from decades of unchallenged privilege. I will not sit next to some scholarship kid who probably got that seat through charity. Move her to economy where she belongs, or move me to a better seat away from her. Your people always think you deserve what you haven't worked for. I've been flying first class for 30 years. You're making real passengers uncomfortable. The words hit 15-year-old Imani Brooks like a physical assault. She sat frozen in seat 2B, her hands clutching her boarding pass and the debate trophy she'd won just hours earlier, her national championship medal still hanging around her neck. Tears began streaming down her face as every passenger in first class turned to stare at her, their phones coming out to record, their expressions ranging from pity to discomfort to carefully maintain neutrality. But not one of them spoke up to say this is wrong. And here's what we need to understand about racism in 2024. It's not dead. It's not even dying. It's alive and thriving in spaces like airplane cabins where wealthy white women look at accomplished black teenagers and see problems instead of people. It's worse than the civil rights era because back then at least the hatred was honest. You knew where the colored-only signs were. You knew which spaces wanted you gone. Today racism wears designer clothes and platinum elite status and speaks in the language of discomfort and belonging and real passengers. It hides behind policies and customer service, and we're just trying to avoid conflict while it destroys black children's dignity 30,000 feet in the air where there's nowhere to run and no one willing to defend you. Imani felt shock and humiliation radiating through her body in waves that made her hands shake. But underneath the hurt was a terrible familiarity. She was 15 years old, and this wasn't even the first time someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong in a space she'd earned. She'd been followed in department stores. Told she was in the wrong classroom on the first day of honors courses. Asked if she was lost when she showed up for gifted program testing. She'd learned early that being excellent wasn't enough, that achievements didn't protect you, that your black skin would always make certain people question whether you deserved to be anywhere they considered theirs. And if you're watching this without subscribing to this channel that exposes these injustices and holds airlines accountable, then ask yourself if you're not part of the problem. You might probably be another silent witness choosing comfort over courage. The scene on Flight 1847 looked like injustice about to take flight. Imani Brooks sat in seat 2B, first class, her 15-year-old frame trembling as she tried not to cry harder. Her trophy sat in her lap, the inscription "Excellence in Public Speaking" catching the overhead light with crushing irony. Around her neck hung her medal from the National Debate Championship she'd just won in Chicago after 3 days of competition against the best high school debaters in the country. Her mother, Dr. Sienna Brooks, had saved for months to surprise Imani with this first-class seat as celebration. Had booked it secretly, had told Imani they'd be flying economy like always, had upgraded her at check-in with tears of pride in her eyes at her daughter's achievement. Imani had been so excited, so grateful, so proud to sit in first class for the first time in her life. Now she sat there shaking while Diane Hartwell, a 62-year-old real estate developer in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, stood in the aisle blocking seat 2A and demanding that the flight attendant remove the black teenager who was ruining her flight experience by existing. Flight attendant Lauren stood between them, her face showing discomfort and anxiety and the kind of conflict aversion that makes people choose the path of least resistance even when that path destroys someone else's dignity. "Ma'am, I've verified her ticket. It's legitimate. She's assigned to 2B. "I don't care if it's legitimate," Diane snapped. "That girl can't possibly afford first class. Check if it's fraudulent. Check if she used someone else's card. Check if she's some diversity scholarship case who got bumped up to make your airline look good. I'm platinum elite and I'm telling you I will not sit next to her." Imani tried to speak through her tears, her voice shaking. "Ma'am, my mom bought this seat for me. I just won the National Debate Championship. I earned this. I didn't do anything wrong." Diane looked at her with contempt. "Earned it? Just go. You're holding up the entire flight with your attitude. This is exactly why people like you don't belong up here. Around them, passengers watched and recorded. A businessman in 3C filmed openly. A woman in 4B looked sympathetic but said nothing. An elderly black man in 4C started to stand up, his face showing anger, but his wife grabbed his arm and pulled him back down with fear in her eyes. "Not worth it," she whispered. "Don't get us kicked off too." Lauren made the devastating choice that conflict-averse employees make when faced with confrontation. Her priority wasn't justice or policy or protecting a minor from discrimination. Her priority was getting the plane off the ground on time, avoiding a scene, making the problem go away by sacrificing the person with the least power. "Miss," she said to Imani, her voice falsely gentle. "To avoid further disruption, would you mind moving to an available economy seat? We'll process a refund for the fare difference." "But this is my seat," Imani sobbed. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why do I have to move?" If you believe no teenager should ever be kicked out of a seat they legitimately purchased because of the color of their skin, keep watching. If you think racial discrimination on airplanes is something we left in the 1960s, you need to see what happens in the next 10 minutes. And if you've ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Also tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now because this story is reaching people everywhere and we need to know we're not alone in fighting this. This story doesn't end the way you think. Hit that like button if you stand against racism, and subscribe to this channel because we're exposing these incidents that airlines don't want you to see. Diane stood over Imani with arms crossed and satisfaction on her face. "Just go. Stop making a scene. Everyone is waiting because of you." Imani looked around at all the passengers watching her, recording her humiliation, and not one person spoke up to defend her. Not one person said she has a right to that seat. Not one person challenged Diane's racism or Lauren's capitulation to it. She gathered her backpack with shaking hands, picked up her trophy that suddenly felt heavy with shame instead of pride, stood up on legs that barely held her weight, and began the walk of humiliation toward economy while every first-class passenger watched a black child be punished for the crime of existing in a space a white woman had decided didn't belong to her. But to understand how a national debate champion ended up crying in the back of an airplane clutching a trophy that celebrated her voice while hers was being silenced, you need to know who Imani Brooks really is. Because this humiliation didn't start with Diane Hartwell's racism. It started 3 days earlier in Chicago with excellence, hard work, and a mother's pride that would soon be weaponized against her daughter. Imani Brooks was 15 years old, a sophomore at King High School in Atlanta, and exactly the kind of student that teachers pointed to as proof that dedication and brilliance could overcome any obstacle. She carried a 4.0 GPA, was captain of the debate team, and had just won the National High School Debate Championship after 3 grueling days of competition against the best young minds in the country. Her specialty was policy debate, the kind that required hundreds of hours of research, the ability to think on your feet, and the confidence to stand before judges and argue complex positions with authority and evidence. She'd spent the entire school year preparing, sacrificing weekends and social events to study healthcare policy, environmental regulation, economic theory. Her coaches said she was a natural, that she had the kind of analytical mind and persuasive voice that could take her anywhere she wanted to go. Imani was being raised by her mother, Dr. Sienna Brooks, a pediatric surgeon at Grady Memorial Hospital who worked brutal hours to provide for them after Imani's father had walked out when she was 3. Sienna had taught her daughter that excellence was their armor, that being twice as good was the only way to be considered half as worthy, that every achievement was a battle won in a war black women had been fighting for generations. She'd also taught Imani about dignity, about carrying yourself with pride even when the world tried to diminish you, about using your voice to speak truth even when people didn't want to hear it. Imani had absorbed those lessons deeply, had built her identity around being excellent, being articulate, being the kind of black girl who proved stereotypes wrong just by existing. This trip to Chicago had been the culmination of everything. The championship trophy, the validation of her hard work, the moment when she stood on that stage and knew she'd earned something undeniable. And her mother, working double shifts for months, had secretly saved enough money to surprise Imani with a first-class ticket home as celebration. That Friday morning at the Chicago O'Hare Hilton, Sienna had told Imani over breakfast, tears in her eyes. "Baby, I'm so proud of you. You worked so hard for this. So I want you to fly home in first class. You've earned it. You deserve to feel special." Imani had cried and hugged her mother, overwhelmed with gratitude and excitement. She'd never flown first class before. Had always flown economy, sometimes middle seats in the back, whatever was cheapest. The idea of spacious seats and extra legroom and being treated like her achievement mattered felt like a dream. Her mother had flown back the night before for an emergency surgery she couldn't reschedule, trusting Imani to fly home alone the next day. At 15, Imani was responsible and mature, had traveled alone before, knew how to navigate airports and handle herself. This should have been a routine flight home, carrying a trophy and wearing a medal and feeling proud of who she was becoming. That morning, Imani had packed carefully, making sure her trophy was secure in her carry-on, wearing her medal because she wanted to remember this feeling, this moment of being a champion. She'd taken a taxi to O'Hare, checked in at the United counter where the agent had smiled and congratulated her on her debate victory, noting the medal and the trophy and treating her with the respect her achievement deserved. Security was smooth. She'd gone through the TSA pre-check line her mother had added to both their profiles, walked through the scanner, collected her bags. At gate C18, she'd waited with other passengers, reviewing her final round speech on her phone, texting her mom about how excited she was to fly first class. Boarding had felt like stepping into a different world. First-class passengers were called first, and Imani had walked down the jetway with her carry-on rolling behind her, her trophy bag over her shoulder, feeling special and seen and valued. The plane was a newer Boeing 737, well-maintained and clean, with first-class seats that looked impossibly spacious compared to the economy seats she was used to. Seat 2B was on the aisle, and Imani had settled in with wonder, running her hands over the leather armrests, adjusting the generous legroom, taking a picture to send her mom later. Other passengers filtered into first class. A businessman in 3C who immediately opened his laptop. A young couple in row 5 who looked like they were heading on vacation. The elderly black man and his wife in 4C who'd smiled at Imani warmly when they saw her medal and trophy. The initial flight crew had been wonderful. A flight attendant named Marcus, a black man in his 30s, had welcomed her aboard and complimented her on her championship medal. Another attendant, an older woman named Susan, had helped her find space in the overhead bin for her trophy bag and asked what she'd won. National Debate Championship, Imani had said proudly. 3 days of competition. Susan had beamed at her. "That's incredible. Congratulations, sweetheart. You should be so proud." Everything had felt perfect. Validating. Like the world was finally recognizing her worth the way she'd always hoped it would. Then Diane Hartwell had boarded, sweeping down the aisle with the entitlement of someone who'd never been told no in her life. She was 62 years old, dressed in expensive designer clothes and jewelry that screamed old money, her highlighted hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting exactly what she wanted. When she reached row 2 and saw Imani sitting in 2B, something shifted in her expression. A flicker of surprise. Then judgment. Then barely concealed disgust. She checked her boarding pass, looked at the seat numbers, looked at Imani again with eyes that made it clear she saw a problem that needed solving. She didn't speak to Imani directly at first. Instead, she flagged down Lauren, the flight attendant who'd just come from the back galley. Her voice was loud enough for multiple rows to hear. "Excuse me, there must be some mistake. That girl can't possibly be in first class. You need to check her ticket. I think it might be fraudulent." Imani's stomach dropped. She looked up at this woman she'd never met, this stranger who'd taken one look at her and decided she was a criminal, and felt the familiar sting of being judged before being known. Lauren checked Imani's boarding pass on her tablet, her face showing embarrassment. "Ma'am, her ticket is legitimate. She's assigned to 2B. But Diane wasn't satisfied. She wasn't interested in facts or policies or treating a 15-year-old with basic dignity. She was interested in making sure this black girl understood she didn't belong in Diane's space. "I'm Platinum Elite," Diane said, her voice dripping with importance. And I'm telling you, I will not sit next to some scholarship kid who probably got upgraded through some diversity program. Move her to economy where she belongs, or move me to a better seat away from her. The words hung in the air, vicious and cruel and undeniably racist. And Imani, who just spent 3 days using her voice to argue and persuade and win, found herself speechless in the face of hatred that didn't care about her achievements or her worth or her humanity. She clutched her trophy tighter, the irony of excellence in public speaking inscribed on something she held while being told to be silent and go away, cutting deeper than any debate loss ever could. And in that moment, Diane Hartwell set in motion a confrontation that would go viral, cost her everything, and prove that sometimes the people who think they have all the power are about to learn exactly how quickly that power can be stripped away when their racism gets caught on camera. Lauren tapped on her tablet one more time, her face showing the kind of discomfort that comes from being forced to verify something that shouldn't need verification. She looked up at Diane, then at Imani, then back at Diane with an expression that said she wished this situation would just disappear. "Ma'am, her ticket is completely legitimate," Lauren said, her voice strained with the effort of staying professional. "It's a paid first-class seat. Fully purchased. There's no upgrade, no points redemption, no error in the system. She's assigned to 2B and her boarding pass is valid." Diane's face flushed red, her voice rising to a volume that made passengers 3 rows back turn their heads. "That's impossible. Look at her. She's a child. How does a teenager afford first class? Do you know what these seats cost?" She gestured at Imani like she was evidence in a trial, like her very presence was proof of some crime that needed exposing. "I'm platinum elite with this airline," Diane continued, her voice dripping with the kind of entitlement that comes from believing your status makes you better than other people. "I will not sit next to some scholarship kid who probably got that seat through charity or points or whatever handout program you people are running now. This is first class. First class. That means it's for people who can actually afford it, who've earned the right to be here." Every eye in first class had turned toward row 2 now. The businessman in 3C had paused his typing. The couple in row 5 had stopped their conversation. Even passengers in business class were craning their necks to see what the commotion was about. Imani felt her hands trembling as she reached for her boarding pass again, even though Lauren had already verified it, even though she'd done nothing wrong, even though she had every right to be sitting exactly where she was. Her voice came out shaky and small, the voice of a child trying to defend herself against an adult who'd already decided she was guilty. "Ma'am, my mother bought this seat for me. She's a doctor. She saved up to surprise me because I just won the national debate championship. I didn't do anything wrong. I have my ticket right here." She held up the boarding pass with hands that shook visibly, the paper crinkling in her grip. Around her neck, her medal caught the overhead light. In her lap, her trophy sat with its inscription facing up, "Excellence in Public Speaking, National Champion." Diane looked at the trophy, at the medal, at Imani's tear-filled eyes, and scoffed with a sound of pure contempt. "Won a debate? Earned it? Sweetie, your people always think you deserve what you haven't worked for. You think one little trophy means you belong up here with passengers who've actually earned their place?" The phrase "your people" landed like a slap. Everyone in first class heard it. Everyone understood exactly what she meant. And the silence that followed was the sound of people choosing not to see, not to hear, not to challenge what was happening right in front of them. "I've earned my place up here through years of loyalty and actual money spent," Diane continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "Real money. Not some diversity scholarship or charity ticket or whatever handout got you into this seat. You're making real passengers uncomfortable. Don't you understand that?" Imani felt tears streaming down her face now, hot and shameful, the kind of crying that happens when you're being attacked and you can't defend yourself because the attack isn't based on anything you did but on who you are. She'd spent 3 days in Chicago arguing complex policy positions, demolishing opponents' cases with evidence and logic, commanding the respect of judges and competitors. But none of that mattered to Diane Hartwell. None of her achievements, none of her excellence, none of her worth as a human being mattered because Diane had looked at her brown skin and decided she was a problem that needed removing. The phrase "your people" hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of first class, contaminating the space with racism that was blatant and undeniable and yet somehow still being tolerated by every adult on that plane. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her watch. They were already 15 minutes behind their scheduled pushback time. The captain would be asking about the delay soon. She had a choice to make: stand up for what was right and risk conflict and further delays, or take the path of least resistance and sacrifice the person with the least power to make the problem go away. Another flight attendant, Thomas, a young black man who'd been working the forward galley, appeared beside Lauren. He'd heard everything. His expression showed barely controlled anger as he shook his head slightly at Lauren, a silent plea that said, "Don't do this. Don't be complicit in this. Don't let this happen." But Lauren was already making her choice. She was looking at Diane's platinum elite status on her screen. She was thinking about the complaint Diane would file if she didn't get her way. She was prioritizing the comfort of a racist adult over the dignity of a child who'd done nothing wrong. "Miss Brooks," Lauren said, and the formality of using her last name after Diane had just called her sweetie felt like another small cruelty. "To avoid further disruption and ensure an on-time departure, would you be willing to move to an available economy seat? We'll process a full refund of the fare difference, of course." The words hit Imani like a physical blow. She looked up at Lauren with disbelief and betrayal written across her face. But this is my seat. I have a ticket. I didn't cause any disruption. Why do I have to move?" Her voice cracked on the last word, the injustice of it overwhelming her ability to stay composed. She was being punished. She was being removed. Not the woman who'd called her your people and said she didn't belong. Not the adult who'd disrupted the entire cabin with racist accusations. But Imani, the child who'd sat quietly in her assigned seat and done nothing except exist while black. Diane interjected before Lauren could respond, her voice dripping with false sweetness that barely masked the venom underneath. "Because you're holding up the entire flight with your attitude, that's why. Everyone is waiting because of you. Just go already. This is exactly why people like you don't belong up here. You get one nice thing and suddenly think you own the place." Tears were streaming down Imani's face openly now. She looked around at the other passengers, silently begging someone, anyone, to speak up and say this is wrong. To tell Lauren that she shouldn't have to move. To challenge Diane's racism. To stand up for a child being bullied by an adult. Several people had their phones out, recording the confrontation. The businessman in 3C was filming openly. A woman in row 4 had her phone angled to capture everything. They were documenting the injustice, preserving it for social media, but not one of them was using their voice to stop it. A white woman in seat 1D, who'd watched the entire exchange with visible discomfort, looked away when Imani's eyes met hers. Looked down at her magazine and pretended to be absorbed in an article, choosing the comfort of not getting involved over the courage of speaking up. A young Asian American couple in 3C exchanged disgusted looks, clearly appalled by what they were witnessing. The woman leaned over and whispered to her husband, her face showing anger. But when he started to stand, she grabbed his arm and shook her head, and he settled back into his seat. They didn't want to get involved. Didn't want to risk becoming targets themselves. Didn't want the confrontation that standing up for Imani would require. Thomas, the flight attendant who'd tried to signal Lauren not to do this, stood nearby with his hands clenched at his sides. His face showed the anguish of someone who knew exactly what was happening, who understood the racism and the injustice and the betrayal, but who also understood the reality of his position as a junior employee who could be fired for challenging a colleague's decision. This is what systemic racism looks like in practice. Not just the Diane Hartwell who actively harms, but the Lauren who capitulates to avoid conflict. The passengers who record but don't intervene. The Thomas who want to help but are intimidated into silence. The collective choice of comfort over courage, of self-preservation over protection of the vulnerable, of letting injustice happen because stopping it would be inconvenient or risky or uncomfortable. Imani sat frozen in her seat, her trophy in her lap, her medal around her neck, physical proof of her excellence rendered meaningless by an adult who decided her black skin disqualified her from belonging in first class. And Lauren, looking at this crying 15-year-old girl and the racist woman demanding her removal, made the choice that would define her career and haunt her conscience. "We really do need to get this flight moving," Lauren said, her voice apologetic but firm. "Miss Brooks, if you could please gather your things." And in that moment, every passenger who'd been recording, every person who'd looked uncomfortable but stayed silent, every witness who'd chosen not to intervene, became complicit in the humiliation of a child whose only crime was being black in a space where a white woman had decided she didn't belong. The flight attendant was about to escort Imani on a walk of shame that would be captured on multiple phones and go viral within minutes, exposing not just one woman's racism but an entire system's failure to protect vulnerable passengers from discrimination. Imani stood up on shaking legs, her entire body trembling with humiliation and grief. Her hands fumbled as she tried to gather her belongings, her vision blurred by tears that wouldn't stop falling. She reached for her backpack in the overhead bin, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip it. The trophy slipped from her lap and clattered to the floor with a sound that made everyone in first class turn to look. The metal base hit the carpet with a hollow thud, the inscription "Excellence in Public Speaking" facing up like an accusation. Like proof of how completely her voice had failed her in this moment. Imani bent to pick it up, her face burning with shame as Diane watched with satisfaction and passengers recorded her humiliation for their social media feeds. She clutched the trophy against her chest with one arm while trying to pull her backpack down with the other. Thomas stepped forward to help her, his face showing sympathy and anger in equal measure. "Let me get that for you," he said quietly, reaching for her bag. But even his kindness felt like salt in the wound. Like confirmation that she was the problem, the disruption, the passenger who needed assistance because she'd caused trouble by existing in a seat she'd paid for. Diane remained seated in 2A, her legs extended into the aisle, her body language making it clear she had no intention of making this easy. When Imani tried to step past her into the aisle, Diane didn't move, didn't pull her feet back, didn't shift to give the teenager space to exit with dignity. Imani had to squeeze past her, had to turn sideways and press against the seat in front to get around Diane's deliberate obstruction. It was a final petty cruelty, a physical manifestation of the message Diane had been sending all along. "You don't belong here and I'm going to make sure you know it." "Excuse me," Imani whispered, her voice barely audible. Diane looked up at her with cold eyes and didn't move an inch. Imani squeezed past, her trophy banging against the seat, her backpack catching on the armrest, tears streaming down her face as she finally made it into the aisle and began the longest walk of her life. From row 2 to row 32. From first class through business class through economy plus all the way to the back of the plane. 30 rows. 180 passengers. Every single one of them watching as a 15-year-old black girl clutching a debate championship trophy was removed from a seat she'd legitimately purchased because a white woman had decided she didn't belong there. Some passengers looked sympathetic but did nothing. A woman in row 8 shook her head sadly but didn't speak. A man in row 12 looked disgusted but stayed silent. They felt bad for her. They knew it was wrong. But feeling bad and staying silent is just another form of complicity. Others deliberately looked away, burying their faces in phones or magazines or pretending to sleep, unwilling to even acknowledge what they were witnessing. Unwilling to make eye contact with injustice because that would require them to do something about it. A middle-aged white businessman in seat 6A shook his head and muttered to his wife just loud enough for Imani to hear as she passed. "What a shame. Such a shame." But he didn't stand up. Didn't tell Lauren this was wrong. Didn't use his voice or his privilege or his presence to defend a child being victimized. He just shook his head and went back to his newspaper, his performative sympathy requiring nothing of him except a whispered comment. In row 4, the elderly black man who'd tried to intervene earlier sat with tears streaming down his face. His wife held his arm tightly, keeping him seated, her own face showing a mixture of grief and fear. As Imani walked past their row, the old man caught her eye. His expression showed recognition, showed understanding, showed decades of witnessing this same scene play out in different forms. He'd lived through Jim Crow, had seen colored-only signs, had been told where he didn't belong his entire life. And now he was watching a child experience that same dehumanization and he was powerless to stop it. "This ain't right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Baby girl, this ain't right and everybody on this plane knows it." His wife squeezed his arm harder. "Please," she whispered urgently. "Don't make trouble. They'll kick us off too. We can't afford that. Please." He stayed seated, but his tears kept falling as Imani passed, and she saw in his face the generational trauma of black people being told to stay quiet, stay in their place, don't cause trouble, accept injustice because fighting it will only make things worse. Imani continued walking, her arms aching from clutching her trophy and backpack, her face wet with tears she couldn't stop, her breath coming in shaky gasps as she tried not to completely break down in front of all these people who were watching her suffer and doing nothing. Behind her, she heard Diane's voice carrying down the aisle, loud enough for multiple rows to hear. "Thank you. Finally. Some people just don't understand their place. Maybe now we can actually depart on time." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not just removing Imani from her seat. Not just the racist accusations. But this final twist of the knife, this public declaration that Imani was the problem, that her removal was a relief, that everyone should be grateful she was gone. And if you're watching this and you haven't liked this video or subscribed to this channel, you need to ask yourself why. Are you any different from those passengers who recorded Imani's humiliation but didn't defend her? This platform exposes racism that people want to ignore. Every like pushes this to more viewers. Every subscription supports accountability. If you can watch a 15-year-old girl cry while being removed from a seat she earned and not even click a button to amplify her story, what does that say about you? Like and subscribe now. Don't be another silent witness. Imani finally reached row 32, the very back of the plane next to the bathrooms where the engine noise was loudest and the seats didn't recline. Seat 32F, a middle seat squeezed between two strangers who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. She collapsed into the seat, her trophy on her lap, and buried her face in her hands. The sobs she'd been holding back came in waves, her shoulders shaking, her breath hitching, all the pride and joy she'd felt about her championship crushed under the weight of racism that had decided her achievement meant nothing. A flight attendant from economy, an older Latino woman named Rosa, appeared with a box of tissues and a bottle of water. Her face showed genuine compassion as she knelt beside Imani's seat. "Mija, I'm so sorry," Rosa whispered. "What happened up there was wrong. You didn't deserve that." But Rosa was economy crew. She had no authority over what happened in first class. She could offer tissues and water and sympathy, but she couldn't fix the injustice or restore Imani's dignity or make the other passengers stop staring. Imani took the tissues with shaking hands and tried to clean her face, tried to pull herself together, tried to find some shred of composure. But the humiliation was too fresh, the pain too raw, the injustice too overwhelming. She sat in seat 32F clutching her trophy that celebrated her excellence in public speaking while her voice had been silenced by racism. And all around her, passengers who'd witnessed her removal settled into their seats and prepared for takeoff as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As if a child hadn't just been punished for the crime of being black in first class. As if that was normal. Acceptable. Just another day at 30,000 feet. But in seat 3A, civil rights attorney Terrence Hamilton had already hit send on something that would make sure this wasn't just another forgotten incident. Something that would go viral in seconds and force United Airlines to make a choice between protecting their brand and protecting their racist passenger. And Imani, crying silently in the back of the plane, had no idea that justice was already in motion. The aircraft door closed with a heavy thud that sounded like finality. Like the sealing of Imani's humiliation into this metal tube where there was no escape, no way out, nowhere to hide from the eyes of everyone who'd watched her be removed from first class and said nothing. She sat in seat 32F, squeezed between a college-aged white guy in headphones who was deliberately ignoring her and an older woman who kept glancing at her with the kind of pity that somehow made everything worse. The engine noise was deafening back here. The bathroom door kept opening and closing as passengers used it during boarding, the smell of chemical cleaner wafting over her every few minutes. This was supposed to be a celebration. Her mother had surprised her with first class as recognition of her achievement, as a way of saying you worked hard and you deserve something special. Instead, Imani sat in the cheapest seat on the plane, her face swollen from crying, her trophy clutched in her lap like evidence of a dream that had turned into a nightmare. She pulled out her phone to text her mother, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. The words came out disjointed and desperate. "Mom, they made me move. A woman said I didn't belong in first class. Said my people don't deserve nice things. The flight attendant made me move to the back. Everyone was watching. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I caused trouble." She hit send and then put her face in her hands, fresh sobs racking her body. The college guy beside her shifted uncomfortably and turned his music up louder. In first class, Diane Hartwell settled into her seat with visible satisfaction. She'd ordered champagne from Lauren, who'd brought it with trembling hands and couldn't quite meet Diane's eyes. Diane sipped it slowly, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. She didn't know that in seat 3A, just one row behind her, Terrence Hamilton had recorded every word she'd said. Had captured her racism in high-definition video with clear audio. Had already uploaded it to Twitter with a caption that was spreading like wildfire. She didn't know that her face, her seat number, her name, and her cruelty were being shared by thousands of people per minute. She didn't know that United Airlines crisis management team was watching real-time analytics showing their brand being destroyed in the court of public opinion. She didn't know that she had approximately 3 more minutes of peace before her entire world imploded. Thomas, the flight attendant who'd tried to help Imani, stood in the galley with his arms crossed, staring at Lauren with barely concealed disgust. "You know that was wrong," he said quietly. "You know we just participated in blatant racism." Lauren's face showed the guilt and fear of someone who'd made a choice she already regretted but couldn't take back. "I had to de-escalate," she said weakly. The passenger was platinum elite. She was threatening to file complaints. "We were already delayed." "So you sacrificed a 15-year-old kid to appease a racist?" Thomas said flatly. "That's what you're telling yourself to sleep tonight?" Lauren had no answer. She just turned away and busied herself with pre-flight preparations, avoiding Thomas's eyes, avoiding her own reflection in the galley mirror, avoiding the reality of what she'd just done. The passenger announcement system chimed. Captain's voice came through calm and professional. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." The plane began to push back from the gate. The journey from Chicago to Atlanta would take approximately 2 hours. But this flight would never make it off the ground. Because in the operations center at United Airlines headquarters, screens were lighting up with alerts. Crisis management specialists were gathering. Legal teams were being called. And a decision was being made that would bring this aircraft right back to the gate before it ever reached the runway. Diane Hartwell had 3 minutes left before she discovered that viral videos move faster than airplanes. And Imani Brooks, crying in seat 32F, had no idea that her nightmare was about to transform into something very different. That the people who'd recorded her humiliation were about to become witnesses to her vindication. That the flight attendant who'd removed her was about to face consequences. And that the woman who'd called her your people and said she didn't belong was about to be removed from the flight she'd fought so hard to keep Imani off of. Justice was coming. Not perfect justice. Not justice that would erase the trauma or restore Imani's joy or make her forget how it felt to be told she didn't deserve the seat her mother had bought her. But justice nonetheless. The kind that happens when technology gives voice to the voiceless. When witnesses finally use their platforms, and when corporations decide that protecting racist passengers costs more than holding them accountable. But in seat 3A, civil rights attorney Terrence Hamilton had already hit send on something that would go viral in seconds and change everything for everyone on this flight. Terrence Hamilton sat in seat 3A reviewing the video he'd just recorded, making sure every crucial moment was captured. The audio was clear. Diane's face was visible. Her racist statements were undeniable. Imani's tears were heartbreaking. Lauren's capitulation was documented. This was exactly the kind of evidence that changed narratives. That made it impossible for airlines to hide behind corporate speak and claim they were investigating. That forced immediate accountability because the truth was right there in high-definition video that anyone could watch and judge for themselves. Terrence had been a civil rights attorney for 19 years. He'd represented victims of housing discrimination, employment discrimination, police brutality. He'd seen how power protected itself, how systems closed ranks around bad actors, How victims were silenced and dismissed until there was evidence too clear to deny. This video was that evidence. He opened Twitter on his phone and began typing, choosing his words carefully for maximum impact. "This is what racism looks like at 30,000 feet, he wrote. United Airlines just forced a black teenage national debate champion out of her paid first-class seat because a racist passenger complained. The girl in seat 2B did nothing wrong. Her crime was existing while black. The woman in seat 2A should be removed from this flight immediately. Flight 1847, Ordita ATL. Watch the whole thing." He attached the 2-minute video showing Diane's accusations, her "your people" comments, her demand that Imani be moved, Lauren's decision to comply, and Imani's tearful walk to the back of the plane. He tagged United Airlines' official account. Tagged the Department of Transportation. Tagged major news outlets including CNN, NBC, ABC. Tagged civil rights organizations including the NAACP and National Action Network. Tagged prominent activists with large followings who could amplify the message. Then he added a detail that would make this impossible to ignore: the specific seat number. Passenger in seat 2A, Diane Hartwell, engaged in blatant racial discrimination. Still sitting in first class drinking champagne while the child she victimized cries in the back. United Airlines, what are you going to do about this? He hit send and watched as the tweet immediately started getting engagement. Retweets. Quote-tweets. Replies expressing outrage. Within 90 seconds, the video had 5,000 views. People were sharing it with comments like, "This is disgusting. That poor baby. I'm canceling my United credit card right now. Sue them into bankruptcy." Within 3 minutes, it had 47,000 views and was being picked up by verified accounts with millions of followers. A prominent journalist retweeted it with "This happened today." A civil rights activist quote-tweeted it with "Racism didn't end, it just got expensive handbags." A celebrity with 12 million followers shared it saying, "I will never fly United again after watching this." Within 5 minutes, the hashtag racism on Flight 1847 was trending nationally, competing with breaking news and celebrity gossip for the top spot on Twitter's trending topics. Within 7 minutes, United Airlines' social media crisis management team received automated alerts. Their monitoring software had detected a massive spike in negative brand mentions, a viral video showing their employee and passenger, and sentiment analysis showing their brand reputation was in free fall. The alerts triggered an emergency protocol. Screenshots of Terrence's tweet and dozens of others were sent to the crisis response team. The video was downloaded and reviewed. Flight records were pulled showing that Flight 1847 was still at the gate, not yet departed, still on the ground in Chicago. Within 8 minutes, the head of crisis communications was on a conference call with legal, operations, and executive leadership. "We have a major situation," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "A passenger racially harassed a minor and our crew removed the minor from her paid seat instead of addressing the passenger's behavior. It's viral. 15 million views and climbing exponentially. We're getting destroyed on every platform." She pulled up analytics showing the damage in real time. Brand sentiment dropping off a cliff. Thousands of people threatening to boycott. News organizations requesting comment. Civil rights lawyers offering pro bono representation to the family. "How long until that flight takes off?" someone asked. "It's still at the gate, operations confirmed. They're in the pushback queue but haven't started taxi yet." "Stop it," the executive vice president of customer experience said. "Get that plane back to the gate immediately. We need to fix this before it gets worse." But the flight attendant already removed the girl, legal interjected. "If we reverse course now, it looks like we only care because it went viral." "That's exactly right," the EVP said. "We only became aware of how badly this was mishandled because it went viral. Now we're aware and we're fixing it. Get me the gate supervisor and get security to that aircraft. We're removing the passenger who caused this. What about the crew member who complied with the racist demand? Suspended pending investigation," the EVP said without hesitation. "This is a catastrophic failure of judgment and training. We address it now and we address it publicly." Within 9 minutes, The gate supervisor and 2 airport security officers were walking toward the jetway of Flight 1847 with orders to board the aircraft and resolve the situation immediately. Within 10 minutes, Captain William Chen received a call in the cockpit that would change the trajectory of this flight and everyone on it. "Captain Chen, this is crisis management," the voice said. "We need you to return to the gate immediately. We have a passenger removal situation that needs to be handled before departure." Chen looked at his first officer with confusion. "We're cleared for pushback. What's the nature of the emergency?" "Viral video showing racial harassment of a minor passenger," the voice said. "The passenger who committed the harassment is still on your aircraft. The victim was removed from her seat by your crew. We're fixing this now." Chen felt his blood pressure spike as he processed what he was being told. "Stand by," he said, and pulled up the passenger manifest on his screen. Imani Brooks, age 15, unaccompanied minor, first class seat 2B, ticket fully paid. He closed his eyes and took a breath. Then he made the announcement that would stop this flight before it ever left the ground. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We're returning to the gate for an operational issue. We'll have more information for you shortly." And in seat 32F, Imani Brooks had no idea that what walked through the aircraft door next would restore her to her rightful seat and remove the woman who'd tried to destroy her dignity. The plane jerked to a stop as it reversed direction back toward the gate. Passengers groaned and muttered complaints about delays. The businessman in 3C closed his laptop with irritation. The couple in row 5 exchanged annoyed glances. Diane Hartwell sipped her champagne, completely unbothered, assuming this was just typical airline incompetence causing another delay. She had no idea that she was the operational issue the captain had mentioned. In the back of the plane, Imani looked up with confusion, her face still wet with tears. Why were they going back to the gate? Had something gone wrong with the aircraft? Was there a maintenance problem? The elderly woman sitting next to her in 32E leaned over. "Maybe someone needs to get off," she said kindly. "Medical emergency or something." Imani nodded and looked down at her phone where her mother still hadn't responded to her text. Dr. Brooks was probably in surgery, unreachable, unaware that her daughter had just been humiliated on the flight she'd paid for as a celebration. The aircraft came to a complete stop at the gate. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated. No one was allowed to move. Then the aircraft door opened and 3 people entered. A woman in a United Airlines supervisor uniform and 2 airport security officers in crisp uniforms with badges and radios. Diane glanced up briefly, then returned to her phone, completely unconcerned. She assumed they were there to remove some other problem passenger. Maybe someone drunk. Maybe someone who'd caused a scene during boarding. Nothing to do with her. The supervisor, Patricia Moreno, walked with purpose down the aisle. Past row 1. Past row 2 where Diane sat. Past first class entirely. Past business class. Past economy plus. All the way to the back of the plane where Imani sat in seat 32F, her face buried in her hands, her trophy on the floor at her feet. Patricia stopped at row 32 and knelt down beside Imani's seat, her voice gentle and filled with genuine remorse. "Miss Brooks? I'm Patricia Moreno, gate supervisor for United Airlines. First, I want to apologize on behalf of this airline for what just happened to you. What you experienced was completely unacceptable and violated every policy and value we claim to uphold." Imani looked up, confused, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't understand. What occurred in first class was racial discrimination," Patricia said clearly, her voice carrying to nearby passengers who were all listening now. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. You had a legitimate ticket for seat 2B. Your mother paid for that seat. You earned your place there through your achievements. And you were removed not because of anything you did, but because another passenger decided you didn't belong based on the color of your skin." The cabin had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this interaction. Phones were out again, but this time recording something very different. "That's your seat, Miss Brooks," Patricia continued. "Seat 2B in first class. And I'm here to escort you back to it right now. The person who forced you out of your seat is being removed from this flight." Imani's face showed disbelief mixed with hope mixed with fear that this was some kind of trick. "Really? Really? Patricia said, standing and offering her hand. Come with me. Let's get you back where you belong. Imani stood on shaking legs, gathering her backpack and her trophy with trembling hands. The elderly woman beside her smiled with tears in her eyes. You go, baby. You deserve that seat. Patricia led Imani up the aisle, past economy passengers who were beginning to understand what was happening, past business class, back toward first class. Every passenger they passed watched with varied expressions ranging from approval to discomfort to shame at their earlier silence. As they approached row 4, the elderly black man who tried to defend Imani earlier stood up. His wife didn't pull him back this time. He looked at Imani with pride and relief written across his face. That's right, young sister, he said, his voice strong and clear. You walk with your head high. You earned that seat and nobody can take that from you. Imani nodded at him, tears streaming again, but different tears now. Not tears of humiliation, but tears of validation, of being seen, of having adults finally stand up for her instead of sacrificing her to avoid conflict. They reached first class and Patricia stopped at row 2. Diane Hartwell looked up from her phone, finally realizing that something was happening that involved her. And then Patricia Moreno delivered the words that would change Diane's smug satisfaction into shocked disbelief. Ms. Hartwell, you need to gather your belongings immediately. You're being removed from this flight. Diane's face went from smug contentment to confusion to outrage in the span of 3 seconds. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Excuse me? Her voice was sharp and indignant. What are you talking about? I'm the one who complained about her. She was the problem. I'm a victim here. Patricia's voice remained professional but cold as ice. Ms. Hartwell, you racially harassed a minor passenger who had every legal right to be in her assigned seat. You used discriminatory language including your people and don't belong. You demanded that she be removed based solely on her race. Multiple passengers recorded your behavior and it's currently viral on social media with over 20 million views and climbing. Diane's face went white. That's ridiculous. I was just concerned about proper procedures. That girl clearly didn't belong in first class and I was right to question how she got that seat. You questioned it because she's black, Patricia said flatly. You assumed fraud. You assumed charity. You assumed she hadn't earned something her mother legitimately purchased for her. That's racial profiling and discrimination. United Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for this behavior. I've been Platinum Elite for 30 years, Diane sputtered, her voice rising. Do you know who I am? I'm Diane Hartwell. I own Hartwell Properties. I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with this airline annually. You can't just kick me off for expressing legitimate safety concerns. Your Platinum Elite status has been revoked permanently, Patricia said. You're banned from United Airlines effective immediately. Now please gather your belongings and come with these officers. The 2 security officers stepped closer, their presence making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. This is absurd, Diane said, standing and grabbing her designer bag with shaking hands. I will sue you. I will sue this airline into bankruptcy. Do you understand the legal consequences of what you're doing? I have lawyers. Expensive lawyers. You're making a massive mistake. Ma'am, the taller security officer said calmly. You can leave voluntarily or we can escort you. Those are your only options. Diane looked around wildly, searching for support, for someone to validate her outrage. Her eyes landed on Terrence Hamilton in seat 3A who was still recording everything on his phone. This is your fault, she hissed at him. You started this. You put me on social media. You ruined my life. Terrence looked at her with calm, measured contempt. No ma'am. This is your consequence. You chose to racially harass a child. You chose to demand her removal. You chose to use your privilege as a weapon. I just chose to document the truth. Those are very different things. Diane grabbed her carry-on from the overhead bin, her movements jerky and frantic. The cabin watched in silence as she was escorted down the aisle, past Imani who stood beside Patricia watching the woman who tried to destroy her now facing her own destruction. As Diane passed row 4, the elderly black man spoke quietly. Racism ain't free anymore. You just learned that the expensive way. Diane said nothing, her face red with humiliation and rage as the security officers flanked her toward the exit. Some passengers began to applaud. Slowly at first, then building to genuine applause that followed Diane all the way off the aircraft. Others filmed her removal, capturing the moment for social media with captions about justice and accountability. The businessman in 6A who'd earlier muttered what a shame now stood and clapped loudly. The young Asian couple in 3C joined the applause. Even passengers who'd stayed silent during Imani's removal now felt safe enough to celebrate Diane's. As the aircraft door closed behind Diane and the security officers, Patricia turned to Imani with a gentle smile. "Your seat is right here, Miss Brooks," she said, gesturing to 2B. "Right where it's always been. Right where you've always belonged." Imani settled back into seat 2B, her trophy on her lap, her tears still falling but for completely different reasons now. The spacious first-class seat that had felt like a dream, then a nightmare, now felt like vindication. Patricia leaned down and spoke quietly. "I know this doesn't undo what happened. I know you'll remember how it felt to be told you don't belong. But I hope you'll also remember this, that when the truth came out, when people saw what really happened, justice came for you. Not perfect justice. Not fast enough justice. But justice." Imani nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. And then Captain William Chen's voice came over the intercom with an announcement that would make headlines alongside the video of Diane's racism. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to address what just occurred on this aircraft." The entire cabin went silent, every passenger listening. "We had a passenger who engaged in racial discrimination against a minor. That passenger has been removed and permanently banned from United Airlines. But I also need to acknowledge that our crew initially failed to handle this situation properly. A 15-year-old girl was removed from her paid seat to appease a racist complaint. That was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong." Lauren, standing in the galley, closed her eyes as the captain's words landed on her like an indictment. "Miss Imani Brooks," Chen continued, his voice filled with emotion, "on behalf of everyone who wears this uniform, I am deeply sorry for what you experienced. You deserved better from us. You deserve better from all of us." The cabin erupted in genuine, heartfelt applause. An elderly white woman in 4D stood up and turned to face Imani directly. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying through the cabin. "You hold your head high. You earned that seat. You earned that trophy. And don't you ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be." Other passengers joined in with words of support and encouragement. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. You're incredibly brave. We should have spoken up sooner. You didn't deserve that." Thomas, the flight attendant who tried to stop Lauren earlier, brought Imani a bottle of water and leaned down to whisper. "You showed more grace and dignity in the last 20 minutes than most adults show in a lifetime. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you." Imani nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of support from people who'd been silent when she needed them most. But even as the plane finally pushed back from the gate for the second time, even as passengers settled in and the flight prepared for departure, Imani felt the weight of what had happened pressing down on her chest. She'd won. Diane was gone. She was back in her seat. The captain had apologized. Justice had been served in a way that rarely happens. But she couldn't enjoy it. Couldn't relax into the comfort of first class. Couldn't feel the joy her mother had intended when she'd surprised her with this seat. Because now every time someone looked at her, she wondered if they were thinking about the video. Wondering if she was the girl from the viral incident. Judging whether she really belonged there or if she'd caused all this trouble. The victory felt hollow. The justice felt incomplete. And Imani realized with crushing clarity that being right, having evidence, having people finally defend you after they failed you initially, none of that erased the trauma of being told you don't belong. Flight 1847 finally took off 45 minutes behind schedule, climbing into clear skies over Chicago. In seat 2B, Imani sat with her trophy on her lap and her medal around her neck, physical proof of her achievement that somehow felt heavier now than it had that morning. She couldn't eat the meal the flight attendants offered. Couldn't focus on the movie playing on her seatback screen. Couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was still watching her, still judging whether she deserved to be there. Thomas checked on her 3 times during the flight, his face showing guilt every time. "Can I get you anything? More water? Snacks? Anything at all?" Imani shook her head each time, polite but distant. She knew he felt bad. Knew he'd tried to stop Lauren. But he'd still let it happen. Had still stood by while she was removed. And his regret now didn't change what she'd experienced. When the plane landed in Atlanta 2 hours later, Imani was one of the first passengers to deplane. She walked through the jetway with her head down, trying to be invisible, trying to avoid the eyes of passengers who might recognize her from the videos that were probably still spreading across social media. Her mother was waiting at the gate, having received emergency messages from United Airlines explaining what had happened. Dr. Sienna Brooks took one look at her daughter's face and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Baby, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." Imani broke down completely, sobbing into her mother's shoulder in the middle of the terminal while travelers walked past pretending not to notice. "I just wanted to feel special," Imani cried. "I just wanted to enjoy the seat you bought me. And she ruined it. She ruined everything." Sienna held her daughter tighter, her own tears falling. "I know, baby. I know." But even as she comforted Imani, Dr. Brooks was already making mental notes. Names of witnesses. Evidence to preserve. Lawyers to contact. Because United Airlines might have removed Diane Hartwell from the flight. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What happened on Flight 1847 was about to have consequences that would extend far beyond one woman's ban and one flight attendant's suspension. Diane Hartwell was about to discover that viral videos don't just disappear when you get off the plane. They follow you home. They reach your clients. They destroy your reputation. And sometimes, they cost you everything you spent 30 years building. Lauren was about to learn that following orders and avoiding conflict doesn't protect you when the orders are wrong and the conflict is racial discrimination. And Imani was about to become something she never asked to be. A symbol, an advocate, a voice for every child who'd been told they don't belong in spaces they earned. But all of that was still to come. In the Atlanta terminal, surrounded by strangers and phones and the endless noise of airport life, Imani just wanted to go home and forget this day ever happened. She had no idea yet that her mother had already contacted Terrence Hamilton, that a civil lawsuit was being drafted, that her story would be featured in national news within hours, that the video of her removal and Diane's removal would be viewed over 50 million times by morning. She just knew that she'd won a national championship and it should have been the best day of her life. Instead, it was the day she learned that excellence doesn't protect you from racism, that having the right ticket doesn't guarantee dignity, and that sometimes the adults who should defend you choose comfort over courage until the whole world is watching and they have no choice left. The video of Diane Hartwell's racist tirade reached 60 million views within 24 hours. News outlets picked up the story. Civil rights organizations issued statements. And Diane's carefully constructed life began to crumble. Her largest client, a progressive tech company, terminated their contract within 48 hours. "We cannot be associated with someone who engages in blatant racial discrimination," their statement read. Hartwell Properties lost $3 million in business that week alone. Her country club quietly asked her to resign her membership. Her name was removed from charity boards. Friends stopped returning calls. And when she tried to defend herself in interviews, claiming she'd been taken out of context, the full unedited video proved her a liar. Within a month, Diane Hartwell was facing a civil lawsuit from Dr. Sienna Brooks on behalf of her daughter. Terrence Hamilton represented Imani pro bono, ensuring her voice would be heard in court. Lauren, the flight attendant who'd removed Imani, was suspended for 2 weeks without pay and required to complete extensive bias training. She'd have to live with the knowledge that she'd sacrificed a child's dignity to avoid confrontation. United Airlines issued a formal apology and offered Imani a full refund, travel vouchers, and a personal meeting with their CEO. But no amount of money or corporate apologies could erase what had happened. 6 months later, Imani still felt anxious every time she flew. Still wondered if she belonged in first class. Still had nightmares about being told to move while everyone watched. But she also became an advocate. She spoke at her school about standing up to injustice. She partnered with civil rights organizations to push for better airline training. And she started a blog sharing stories of young people facing discrimination. When a reporter asked what she wanted people to learn from her experience, Imani held up her trophy with its inscription "Excellence in Public Speaking." "I won this for using my voice," she said. "But that day on the plane, I learned my voice wasn't enough. I needed witnesses willing to use theirs too. That's what changed everything. Not me being excellent, but someone finally being brave enough to document the truth and demand accountability." She paused, then added quietly, "I still wish it had never happened. Justice doesn't erase trauma. Winning doesn't undo the pain. But maybe my story will help the next kid who gets told they don't belong. Maybe they'll know they're not alone. And maybe next time, people won't wait for a video to go viral before they stand up for what's right." Diane Hartwell served no jail time, paid a settlement, lost her business and reputation. But she never apologized sincerely, never acknowledged her racism, never truly understood that the problem wasn't getting caught but the hatred she'd carried for 62 years. Lauren kept her job but lost her peace. Every flight reminded her of the day she chose policy over people, comfort over courage. And Imani? She learned to fly again. Learned to sit in first class without feeling like she had to prove she belonged. Learned that her worth wasn't determined by strangers' prejudice. But she never forgot. Never let herself forget. Because some lessons, once learned at 15 while crying in the back of a plane you paid to be in the front of, stay with you forever. Sometimes justice comes. Sometimes consequences land on those who've escaped them for decades. Sometimes the system works just enough to remind you it could work all the time if people chose courage over comfort. But the scars remain. The trauma lingers. And the question Imani asked that day, the one that broke her mother's heart, echoes still. Why do I have to move? I didn't do anything wrong. The answer, the one that Imani and every black child who's faced this question knows too well, is heartbreaking in its simplicity. Because to some people, your existence is enough of a crime. Your blackness in spaces they've claimed as theirs is disruption enough. Your achievements threaten their belief that excellence belongs only to them. And until more people choose to be like Terrence Hamilton, documenting and demanding accountability, until more people refuse to be silent witnesses, until more people decide that a child's dignity matters more than their comfort, that question will keep being asked. And black children will keep being told to move. To know their place. To accept that no amount of excellence protects them from racism disguised as policy, as concern, as I'm just asking questions. Imani Brooks won a national debate championship. But the most important argument she ever made wasn't in a competition. It was on Flight 1847 when she said through tears, "This is my seat. I didn't do anything wrong." And for once, finally, someone listened. Not fast enough. Not without her being traumatized first. Not without having to be rescued rather than defended from the start. But someone listened. And that, in America in 2025, sometimes has to be enough. Even when it shouldn't be. Even when it's not.